Let me ask you something. How much money have you spent on bagged compost in the last few years? If you're anything like me, it adds up fast. $10 a bag, maybe 12. You load up the truck every spring, haul it home, spread it across your beds, and by midsummer your soil still isn't where you want it to be. The plants are okay, not great. The soil dries out too fast. And come next spring, you're right back at the garden center loading up all over again. I did that for years. Spent hundreds of dollars on compost that came in plastic bags from who knows where, made from who knows what, every single year. Not because they have some complicated system or expensive equipment and start making your own with materials you probably already have. Here's what finally opened my eyes. I was visiting a friend out in Lancaster County a few years back, and I asked to see his garden. Beautiful rows, incredible soil, plants that looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. I asked him what compost he used, and he just kind of looked at me funny. He pointed to a pile at the edge of his property and said, "That's it. That's what feeds everything." It was just a pile. Straw, manure, kitchen scraps, leaves, nothing fancy. But what came out of the bottom of that pile was the darkest, richest, best-smelling compost I'd ever seen, and he hadn't spent a dime on it. That moment stuck with me because I realized I'd been buying something I could have been making for free this whole time. Not just making it, but making it better than anything I could buy. In Amish communities, particularly in the farming settlements of Lancaster County and Holmes County, Ohio, there's a deep-rooted belief that nothing God provides should go to waste. This is tied to their broader philosophy. In practice, this means the Amish don't see kitchen scraps as garbage. They don't see manure as a problem to dispose of. Every scrap of organic material that passes through their household or farm gets returned to the soil. It's a closed loop. Nothing leaves the system, and the result is soil that gets richer and more productive every single year. The modern soil science confirms exactly what the Amish have known through generations of practice. Compost made from diverse, locally sourced organic materials is measurably superior to most commercial bagged compost. Research from the Rodale Institute and multiple are what make your soil actually alive, and living soil is what grows healthy, productive plants. So this isn't just about saving money, although you will. It's about producing something better than what. This matters more than most people realize, and getting it wrong is one of the main reasons people give up on composting. The Amish place their compost piles directly on bare ground, not on concrete, not on gravel, not in a sealed plastic tumbler. Direct ground contact is important because it allows earthworms, ground beetles, and soil microorganisms to migrate up into the pile from below. These creatures are a huge part of what breaks your compost down. Cut them off from the pile and you're relying on bacteria alone, which works but takes much longer. Full blasting sun in zones 7 through 9 can dry it out too fast. Partial sun, a few hours of morning light with afternoon shade, is the sweet spot. Now here's the dimension that matters most. Your pile needs to be at least 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep, and 3 feet tall. That's the minimum size to generate and retain the internal heat that drives fast decomposition. Anything smaller and the pile won't reach the temperatures needed to break down materials efficiently or kill weed seeds. If you have the space, 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet is even better. The Amish often build larger piles because they have more material, but for a home garden, 3 to 4 feet in each direction is your target. If you're in a suburban setting and an open pile isn't practical, a simple 3-sided bin made from wooden pallets works perfectly. You can often get pallets for free from local businesses. Stand 3 pallets on their sides, tie or wire them together at the corners, and you have a contained bin with open slats that allow airflow. The Amish keep things simple, and so should you. No need for expensive tumbler bins or multi-chamber systems to get started. This second step is where most people either set themselves up for success or accidentally create a slimy mess they end up abandoning. The secret to good compost, and the thing the Amish understand instinctively, is the balance between 2 types of material. Carbon-rich materials, which gardeners call browns, and nitrogen-rich materials, which we call greens. Browns are your dry, woody, fibrous materials. Think dried leaves, straw, shredded cardboard, sawdust, wood chips, dried corn stalks, and shredded newspaper. These provide the carbon that feeds the microorganisms doing the decomposition work. They also create air pockets in the pile that allow oxygen to circulate. Greens are your wet, fresh, nitrogen nitrogen-heavy materials, kitchen scraps like vegetable peels, fruit cores, coffee grounds and eggshells, fresh grass clippings, garden trimmings, and the big one the Amish always have on hand, animal manure. Horse, cow, chicken, and rabbit manure are all excellent nitrogen sources. Chicken manure is the hottest, meaning it has the highest nitrogen content, so it breaks down the fastest, but also needs to be balanced with more browns. Here's the ratio that makes everything work. You want roughly 3 parts brown material to 1 part green material by volume, not by weight, by volume. So for every bucket of kitchen scraps or manure you add, you want about 3 buckets of dried leaves or straw. This 3-to-1 ratio gives the pile the carbon to nitrogen balance that microorganisms need to thrive. Too many greens and the pile turns into a wet, anaerobic, foul-smelling mess. Too many browns and it just sits there doing nothing for months. Now I know what some of you are thinking. I don't have a farm, I don't have horse manure or bales of straw lying around. That's fine. You don't need a farm to make this work. Here are the substitutions. For animal manure, use fresh grass clippings. They're high in nitrogen and work almost as well. Coffee grounds are another excellent nitrogen source, and most coffee shops will give you bags of used grounds for free if you ask. For straw, use shredded corrugated cardboard, dried leaves that you can collect by the bagful every fall, or shredded newspaper. The Amish use what they have, and so should you. The principle stays the same regardless of the specific materials. A few things to keep out of your pile. No meat, no dairy, no cooked food with oils or sauces. These attract rodents and create odor problems. No dog or cat waste, which can carry pathogens. No diseased plant material, because even a hot pile may not kill all plant pathogens. And no weeds that have gone to seed unless your pile consistently reaches internal temperatures above 130 degrees Fahrenheit, which we'll talk about in a later step. Now here's where we actually build the pile, and this is the part that separates a compost pile that works from one that just sits there. The Amish layering method is straightforward, and once you see the logic behind it, you'll never just dump everything into a heap again. Start with a base layer of coarse brown material. Twigs, small branches, or thick corn stalks work perfectly. Lay these down about 3 to 4 inches deep across the bottom of your pile area. This base layer serves a critical purpose. It creates air channels underneath the pile that allow oxygen to flow up from the bottom. Decomposition is an aerobic process, meaning the bacteria that do the real work need oxygen. Without this base layer, the bottom of your pile goes anaerobic, turns slimy, and starts to smell like rotten eggs. The Amish always start with this coarse base. It's a small detail that makes a big difference. On top of that base, add your first layer of brown material. Dried leaves, straw, or shredded cardboard about 4 to 6 inches deep. Then add a layer of green material, 2 to 3 inches deep, kitchen scraps, fresh grass clippings, or manure. Then another layer of browns, 4 to 6 inches. Then greens, 2 to 3 inches. You keep alternating until your pile reaches that 3 to 4 foot height. Think of it like building a lasagna. Browns, greens, greens. Each layer feeds the next. The browns provide carbon and structure. The greens provide nitrogen and moisture. Together, they create the conditions for thermophilic bacteria to ignite, which is when the real magic starts. If you have access to a few shovelfuls of finished compost or good garden soil, toss a thin scattering between every few layers. This introduces a starter culture of the beneficial microorganisms that will colonize the entire pile. The Amish don't buy compost starters or accelerator products. They use a handful of soil or old compost from last year's pile. It's free and it works better than anything in a bottle. One more thing about the layering. Don't pack the layers down. You want the pile to be firm but not compressed. Air needs to circulate through those layers for the aerobic bacteria to function. If you pack it too tightly, you choke off the oxygen and the pile goes anaerobic. Let it settle on its own. If this approach to gardening resonates with you and you want more of these traditional methods that actually work, hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more coming. Now let's talk about what to do once your pile is built. Once your pile is built, the two things that determine whether you get finished compost in 8 weeks or 8 months are moisture and airflow. Get these right, and the pile almost takes care of itself. Get them wrong, and you end up with either a dried out heap of leaves that hasn't changed in 6 months or a soggy, stinking mound that nobody wants to go near. I made both of those mistakes before I learned how the Amish manage their piles, and the fix is simpler than you'd think. The moisture level in your pile should feel like a wrung out sponge. Pick up a handful of material from the center center of the pile and squeeze it. You should feel dampness and maybe get a drop or two of water, but it should not be dripping wet. If it's dry and crumbly, the microorganisms can't function in decomposition stalls. If it's soaking wet, you've driven out the oxygen and the pile goes anaerobic, which is what causes that sour, rotten smell. Here's how to manage it. When you first build the pile, give each layer a light watering as you go, not soaking it just enough to dampen the material evenly. After that, check the moisture once a week by grabbing a handful from about a foot into the pile. If it's too dry, use a garden hose on a gentle setting and water the pile for a minute or two. Then let it soak in. If it's too wet, add a few inches of dry brown material on top and mix it in with a pitchfork. The browns will absorb the excess moisture and restore airflow. Rainfall will do a lot of the watering for you in most climates, but if you're in zones 8 or 9 where summer heat can bake a pile dry in a few days, consider covering the top loosely with a piece of old carpet, a tarp with the edges left open, or even a thick layer of straw. The Amish in Lancaster County often pile extra straw on top of their compost during the hottest part of summer. It shades the pile, holds moisture in, and continues to feed the composting process as it breaks down. In colder zones 3 through 5, the opposite problem shows up. The pile slows down dramatically in winter as temperatures drop. That's normal. The Amish don't fight it. They keep adding material through the cold months, and as soon as spring warmth returns, the pile reactivates and catches up quickly. Building a larger pile in fall, 4 feet or bigger in each direction, helps retain internal heat longer into the cold season. Now let's talk about turning. This is where a lot of people overcomplicate things, and it's also where you can dramatically speed up the process if you do it right. Turning means taking a garden fork or pitchfork, pushing it into the pile, and flipping the material so that what was on the outside ends up in the center and what was in the center moves to the outside. This does two things. It reintroduces oxygen throughout the pile, which reinvigorates the aerobic bacteria, and it moves cooler, less decomposed material from the edges into the hot center where the most active breakdown is happening. The Amish don't turn their piles on a rigid calendar. They read the pile, and you can learn to do the same. Here's what to watch for. Within 3 to 5 days of building a properly layered pile, you should feel heat radiating from the center when you push your hand in about 12 inches. If you have a long-stemmed compost thermometer, even better. A healthy active pile should reach internal temperatures of 130 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit within the first week. That heat is generated by thermophilic bacteria consuming the organic material, and it's what breaks things down fast and kills weed seeds. When that heat begins to drop, which usually happens after 10 to 14 days, that's your signal to turn the pile. After turning, the temperature will climb again within a day or two as fresh material hits the hot zone and oxygen floods back in. You'll go through this cycle of heating, cooling, turning, and reheating about 3 to 4 times over the course of 8 to 12 weeks. Each time the material gets darker, smaller, and more uniform in texture. Here are the visual and sensory cues to watch for. A pile that's working properly will steam when you turn it on a cool morning. That's a great sign. It should smell earthy, like a forest floor after rain. If it smells sour or like ammonia, you have too much nitrogen and need to add more browns. If it doesn't heat up at all, it either needs more green material, more moisture, or both. If the pile shrinks to about half its original size and the material is dark brown, crumbly, and smells like clean earth, it's getting close to finished. The Amish know their compost is ready when it looks and feels like rich, dark soil and you can no longer identify any of the original materials. No recognizable straw, no intact leaves, no visible kitchen scraps, just a uniform, crumbly, earthy smelling amendment that's ready to feed your garden. This usually takes 8 to 12 weeks with active turning, or 6 months to a year if you take a more passive approach and let nature do its thing on its own schedule. Once your compost is finished, it's time to put it to work. Spread it across your garden beds 2 to 3 inches deep and work it into the top 4 to 6 inches of soil. Do this in early spring before planting and again in fall after you've cleared your summer crops. 2 applications per year is what the Amish typically do, and it's what keeps their soil getting better year after year instead of plateauing. If you're starting new beds, be generous. A 3 to 4 inch layer worked into the native soil makes an enormous difference in the first season. For established beds that have been amended for a few years, 2 inches is plenty for maintenance. You can also use finished compost as a side dressing around established plants during the growing season. Just scatter a handful around the base of each tomato, pepper, or squash plant and water it in. The nutrients release slowly over weeks, feeding the plants without the risk of burning that comes with synthetic fertilizers. One honest note, your first batch of homemade compost might not look like the perfect screened, uniform product you get in a bag. It might have a few small sticks or partially decomposed leaves mixed in. That's fine. It's still loaded with microbial life and nutrients. As your composting process matures over 2 or 3 cycles, your finished product will get more and more consistent. The Amish don't worry about perfection with their compost. They trust the process, and after a few rounds, so will you. Let me share some patterns I see in how most of us approach composting versus how the Amish handle it. I made every one of these mistakes myself, so no judgment here. The first pattern is buying compost every spring instead of making it. It's convenient, I get it, but most bagged compost has been processed at high industrial temperatures that kill off a significant portion of the beneficial microorganisms. What you're getting is mostly organic matter without much microbial life. Homemade compost from a well-managed pile is teeming with bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and beneficial nematodes that colonize your soil and keep it productive. The difference shows up in your plants within one growing season. The second pattern is throwing everything into a pile with no layering. This is the number one reason homemade compost fails. I know when you dump greens and browns together in a random heap, you get pockets of anaerobic sludge next to dry, untouched material. The Amish layering method ensures even distribution of carbon and nitrogen throughout the pile so that decomposition happens uniformly. The third pattern is never turning the pile. A pile that's never turned will eventually decompose, but it takes far longer, often a year or more, and the outer material never fully breaks down. Even turning it once a month makes a dramatic difference. The Amish check their piles regularly and turn when the pile tells them to, not on a rigid schedule, but when the heat drops. The fourth pattern is giving up because of smell. If your pile smells bad, it's not because composting doesn't work. It's because the balance is off. 9 times out of 10, the fix is simply adding more browns and turning the pile to reintroduce oxygen. Within a day or two, the smell disappears. A properly managed compost pile should never stink. It should smell like earth. Now, here's something I learned from an Amish family in Lancaster County that I've never heard mentioned anywhere else, and it made a noticeable difference in how fast my piles break down. Before adding any brown material to the pile, they run it over with a hand-push reel mower or chop it with a machete to break it into smaller pieces. Leaves get shredded, straw gets chopped into lengths of 3 to 4 inches, corn stalks get split and cut into short sections. The reason is simple science. Decomposition happens on surfaces. The more surface area you expose to the bacteria and fungi, the faster they can consume the material. A whole dried leaf might take months to break down. That same leaf shredded into small pieces breaks down in weeks. The Amish don't have fancy chipper shredders. They use a mower, a machete, or they simply run over a pile of dry leaves with a wheelbarrow a few times to crush them. It takes 5 minutes of effort and cuts your composting time by as much as a third. I started shredding all my browns before adding them about 3 years ago, and my piles now produce finished compost a full month faster than they used to. It seems almost too simple to matter, but once you understand the biology of surface area and microbial access, it makes perfect sense. That's what I've learned from Amish gardeners about making your own compost for free. Choose your spot, size the pile right, balance your browns. And greens at a 3-to-1 ratio. Layer them like a lasagna. Keep the moisture like a wrung-out sponge. Turn when the heat tells you to, and let the biology do the heavy lifting. You don't need to buy compost ever again. You just need to start building your first pile. If this changed how you think about your soil and your garden budget, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what you're composting, what you're struggling with, or what worked for you. And if you want more of these deep dives into how traditional communities grow food the way nature intended, hit subscribe. I got plenty more to share. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.